As he sat in his room thinking about what he could do next and how he could get into Peter's room, he came up with a plan. Just ask him for an envelope. He had plenty of those after writing to all his pen pals. So he walked down the hallway, just 2 doors down, and stood outside his door. He knocked on the door, and as Peter answered, he said, "Can I have an envelope?" As Peter turned round to grab the envelope, he saw his opportunity. He jumped on him, pushed him to the floor, and started stabbing. Hi, my name's Sara Jade, and welcome to my channel, where we talk about true crime, unsolved cases and more. Now let's get into this week's case. Ian Kay was born in 1967 in London in the UK, and grew up taking drugs and committing robberies to feed his habit. He was described as a devil worshipper and fantasised about killing people. He would prey on unsuspected cashiers and would threaten them with a knife until he got what he wanted. This carried on until December 1990, when he was finally caught and sent to prison for 8 years at the age of 23. He had committed over 16 robberies, which ended with him stabbing a man and causing him to be paralysed in his arm. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison for his crime. However, just 3 years later, they were letting prisoners out on day release, and Ian was allowed home for home release. It had took him less than 2 hours before he had robbed the local post office and ran away with over £2,000, and was soon sent back to prison. Less than a year later, in August 1994, and Ian was again allowed out on day release. This time, however, he absconded and never returned. John Penfold was 21 years old and worked at the local Woolworths in Teddington as an assistant manager. He first started working for Woolworths at the age of 16 when he was a Saturday boy, but soon worked his way through the ranks. He was described as a likeable, intelligent young man who obviously had lots of potential. Just 3 months earlier, John was appointed assistant manager at the Teddington branch. Between October and November, when Ian had fled from the prison, he had robbed over 7 Woolworths, as he saw them as an easy target. On the 15th of November 2014, Ian walked into the Teddington branch, where John worked. Ian walked over to the till with a packet of crisps, where Julia Bobis, the cashier, was on her second day of the job, and he waited for her to open up the cash register before threatening her with a knife. As Ian removed the knife from his pocket, John approached, carrying loads of change for the tills. Ian, believing that he was lunging at him and trying to stop him, stabbed him in the chest. He had penetrated the knife so deep it went up to the handle. John immediately dropped the change and groaned as he fell back. The cashier stepped back in shock, and Ian grabbed 2 measly 50p coins, which he had dropped running away from the scene. Ian had stabbed John straight through the heart, and he died on the way to hospital. John's girlfriend said they had so much to look forward to, and Ian had taken this all away from them. She described how the pain will never fade, and how they had spent all their time together. She couldn't imagine a life without him. Ian was finally caught and charged with murder. He said he'd only stabbed John as he had lunged at him. He called him a have-a-go hero and deserved to die. Psychiatrists said that Ian suffered from abnormal personality disorder and couldn't control his violent outbursts. The jury rejected his plea of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, and he was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 22 years in prison in 1995. Ian was sentenced to Broadmoor, a maximum security psychiatric hospital, after showing signs of mental illness, and this is where he met the infamous Peter Sutcliffe. Peter was born in Bingley in Yorkshire to working class parents John and Kathleen on the 2nd of June 1946. He was described as a loner and left school at the age of 15. He went on to have a few low-paying jobs, including a gravedigger, before working on the packing line of a television company. He moved from job to job until he landed a job as a truck driver in October 1976. In February 1967, he had met Sonia Susama, and they were eventually married in August 1974. In August 1977, they bought a house in Heaton, Bradford, and this is where they lived until Peter's arrest. Peter had an obsession with prostitutes, and he would watch them as they solicited on the streets of Bradford and Leeds. He first started his attack on women in 1969, when he had become enraged when a prostitute had conned him out of some money. He went looking for her on the streets before he came across another prostitute. He followed her and attacked her with a stone before running away. His next couple of attacks happened in the same way. He would attack women while they were walking on their own and hit them over the head before fleeing. His first murder came in October 1975 when he attacked a young woman called Wilma McCain. Peter had hit her over the head with a hammer before stabbing her to death. He would then go on to kill over 12 more women and attack over 10 more. He would usually attack them with a hammer from behind while they weren't looking and then stab them to death. In October 1977, Peter narrowly escaped being caught when he remembered that he had left a £5 note on one of the women that he had killed and believed that it would be traced back to him. He left his house during a party that he was hosting to go and check the body and get the £5 note. However, he had no luck. When they later discovered the body of Jean Jordan, they found the £5 note and traced it back to a Midland bank in Shipley. They interviewed over 5,000 men, including Peter, but they said his alibi was solid as he had been at the party. On the 2nd of January 1981, Peter was pulled over by the police with a prostitute called Olivia Ribeira. They discovered he had false number plates and he was soon arrested. When in custody, they questioned him about the Ripper. They had also discovered a knife, hammer and rope discarded where they had picked him up. After 2 days of questioning, he finally admitted that he was the Yorkshire Ripper. Over the next 2 days, he described the attacks in detail and stated that the women he killed were filth and he was just cleaning up the streets. He was charged and found guilty of murder on all accounts and was given a whole life sentence. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, but wasn't transferred to Broadmoor prison until March 1984 after he was attacked by James Costello. He had attacked him with a coffee jar and sliced his face, giving him over 30 stitches. Peter and Ian were in the same art class, and Ian had just been moved down 2 doors away from Peter. On the 10th of March 1997, Ian went down to Peter's room to ask him for an envelope. When Peter turned round to grab the envelope, Ian saw the opportunity to attack. He pushed him to the ground, pinned him, and started stabbing him in the eyes. He stabbed him over 6 times in the left eye and 4 times in the right eye with a Parker pen he had got from the art class. He only stopped when Peter managed to grab the pen and push it away from him. He calmly stood up, walked out the room and closed the door behind him. As the staff entered the room, they found Peter leaning over the sink, screaming, "I can't see, I think I'm blind." Ian was then picked up just a short while later when one of the staff members saw they had blood all over his hands and face. Peter was taken by over 14 guards to Frimley Hospital in Surrey, where he was treated by an eye specialist, but he was unable to save his left eye. He was left blind in his left eye, and his right eye was severely damaged. Ian went on trial on the 28th of January 1998, where they discovered he had first wanted to use a razor, but his plan had failed when one of the guards had discovered the razor was missing. He told them he was trying to commit suicide with the blade. He told the court how he was going to use a razor attached to a toothbrush and attack him on both sides of his jugular and stand there and watch him die. He told them killing had always been on his mind ever since he had entered Broadmoor. He said he should have just straddled him and strangled him to death with his bare hands. He then went on to say that God had told Peter to kill 13 women, so the devil had told him to kill him because of that. The court also heard how he had persuaded another inmate to turn on loud music just before the attack. He had also taken an electric flex with him, but failed to use it. Although the pair had both been in art class together, there was no record of hostility between the two, so no one could quite understand his motives. Ian described how he'd thought about killing Peter for a very long time. Others, however, described how Ian had become upset when he was moved just 2 doors down from the notorious killer. There was also the theory that he did it in a show of bravado to show that he was the top dog and to remove the fear of being attacked himself. Ian was eventually sentenced at the age of 30 to be held at the mental health unit indefinitely for up to a minimum of 20 years, where he would be 50 years old. He remained at Broadmoor on a no-contact list and could never be in the same room as Peter. Ian was eventually released on the 14th of March 2021 from the recommendation of the parole board. Peter Sutcliffe died at the age of 74 in November 2020 from complications from his heart and COVID. Thank you for watching, and if you like this one, be sure to check out another one of our stories here. Thank you for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.
You call me a saint, but you know I'm a stranger, all willing